Power does not survive through force alone. If it did, it would collapse under its own weight. Force can impose control, but it cannot sustain it, because force generates resistance, and resistance accumulates quietly, gradually, inevitably. For a system to endure, something else is required. Not control, not fear, legitimacy. Legitimacy is not declared. It is not written into law. It is not enforced by authority. It is perceived. It exists only when people believe that a system has the right to operate, not because they are forced to comply, but because compliance feels justified. This is where power changes form. It no longer needs to impose behavior. It begins to align perception. When legitimacy is present, rules are not experienced as restrictions. They are experienced as structure. And structure feels natural. Consider ancient empires. They did not sustain control across vast territories through force alone. That would have been impossible. Instead, they constructed legitimacy through symbols, through rituals, through narratives of order. The emperor was not simply a ruler. He was a representation of stability, of continuity, of inevitability. When authority is seen as legitimate, obedience is no longer experienced as submission. It becomes participation. People do not feel controlled. They feel aligned. This principle did not disappear. It evolved. Modern systems rarely rely on visible authority. They rely on perceived legitimacy. Institutions do not simply operate. They justify their existence through language, through procedure, through consistency. Legal systems derive legitimacy from process. Financial systems derive legitimacy from stability. Democratic systems derive legitimacy from representations. In each case, it appears justified. But continuously, through alignment between expectation and experience. When systems behave as expected, legitimacy strengthens. When they deviate, legitimacy begins to erode. And this erosion is rarely visible at first. There is no immediate collapse, no sudden fracture. Instead, something subtle begins to shift. Confidence weakens. Trust becomes conditional. Compliance becomes fragile. At this stage, systems often respond incorrectly. They attempt to reinforce control, more rules, more enforcement, more visibility of authority. But this rarely restores legitimacy, because legitimacy cannot be forced. Force can maintain order temporarily, but it cannot reveal belief. And without belief, systems become dependent on constant intervention, which is unsustainable. In the first episode, we examined how power is designed. In the second, how attention is structured. In the third, how incentives shape behavior. And now, we reach the next layer: why systems are accepted at all. Legitimacy is the bridge between structure and behavior. It transforms imposed systems into accepted realities. Consider digital platforms. They do not force participation. They invite it. Through usability, through accessibility, through perceived value. Users do not feel controlled. They feel served. And when people feel served, they rarely question the structure behind the service. This creates a paradox. The more seamless a system feels, the less visible its power becomes. And the less visible power becomes, the more stable it is. But when legitimacy begins to fracture, this invisibility disappears. Suddenly, systems feel heavy, rigid, imposed. At this point, behavior changes. People comply less, question more, resist subtly. Not because they suddenly reject the system, but because the system no longer feels justified. Restoring legitimacy is difficult. It requires more than adjustment. It requires realignment between expectations, outcomes, incentives, perception. And this is why legitimacy is the most fragile layer of power, because it exists entirely in perception. Power that relies on force is visible. Power that relies on incentives is predictable. But power that achieves legitimacy becomes invisible, because it no longer needs to assert itself. It is accepted. And when power is accepted, it becomes stable. Because the most effective systems are not those that control behavior. They are those that make control unnecessary.